She found a title in her father's toolbox. It led to 60 acres her family forgot existed. What she discovered there wasn't just about the land. It was about a truth that would rewrite her entire life. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there was a place for you in this world, hit that subscribe button, because this story is for you. The day I turned 18 was the day I became officially homeless. They don't call it that, of course. They call it aging out. It's a clean, sterile term for a messy, terrifying reality. For 2 years, I had lived in the Northwood group home for girls, a place that smelled perpetually of bleach and quiet desperation. 2 years of scheduled meals, mandatory counseling sessions, and the constant, low hum of institutional fluorescent lights. 2 years of learning how to make myself small, how to not want anything too badly, because wanting was a weakness the system was designed to cure you of. My caseworker, a tired-looking woman named Mrs. Gable, whose smile never quite reached her eyes, handed me a single black trash bag containing my life. A few changes of clothes, a worn paperback copy of a book I'd read a dozen times, a toothbrush, and then a box. A heavy, metal toolbox, rusted at the corners and dented on one side. "This was your father's," she said, her voice flat, as if she were reading from a script. "It was in storage. We're required to hold personal effects until a ward comes of age." I stared at it. I had no memory of my father ever using a toolbox. My memories of him were fractured, dreamlike. The scratch of his beard against my cheek, the low rumble of his laugh, the scent of sawdust and coffee that clung to his flannel shirts. He died when I was 6. A construction accident, they told me. After that, things fell apart. My mom, she just wasn't there anymore, even when she was in the room. Then came the system, and the years blurred into a series of strange houses and stranger families, until I landed at Northwood. I didn't want the toolbox. It felt like an anchor to a past I couldn't properly remember, a painful reminder of a life that had been snatched away. It was heavy. I almost told her to keep it, to throw it away. But some instinct, some flicker of a 6-year-old girl who still remembered the safety of her father's arms, made me wrap my fingers around the cold metal handle. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "There's a spot for you at the transitional housing on Miller Street," Mrs. Gable continued, checking her watch. "It's not permanent. You get 6 months. You'll have a roommate. You need to find a job, Leah. The world doesn't wait." I knew that. The world had never waited for me. It had spun on without a care while I was trying to piece together who I was supposed to be. I hefted the trash bag over one shoulder and picked up the toolbox with my other hand. Its weight was awkward, unbalanced. It banged against my leg with every step as I walked out of the Northwood group home for the last time. The automatic glass door hissed shut behind me, and for the first time in 12 years, there was no one in the world legally responsible for me. I had never felt so free or so completely terrified. The room at the Miller Street facility was even smaller than my room at Northwood. It was a concrete box with 2 cots, a shared dresser, and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. My new roommate, a girl named Sasha with wary eyes and a tattoo of a spiderweb on her neck, grunted a hello and then promptly put on her headphones, creating an invisible wall between us. I was grateful for it. I didn't have the energy for introductions. I dropped my trash bag on the empty cot and set the toolbox down on the floor. It made a solid, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the small space. For a while, I just sat there, staring at it. The rust wasn't just on the corners. It bloomed in faint, reddish-brown constellations across the lid. The latch was stiff, and I had to pry it open with my fingernails. It sprang open with a loud groan, like a joint that hadn't been used in years. The smell hit me first. It was him. Faint, but unmistakable. Sawdust, oil, and something else. Something that smelled like cold earth and pine needles. Inside, it wasn't a jumble of tools like I expected. Everything was neatly organized. A set of wrenches lay in a worn leather roll. Screwdrivers were arranged by size in a fitted plastic tray. There was a hammer with a dark, smooth wooden handle, worn from the grip of a hand I could barely recall. It was the toolbox of a man who cared about his work, who respected his tools. My fingers traced the handle of the hammer. It felt solid, real. More real than my fragmented memories. For a second, I could almost feel him there with me, his quiet presence filling the sterile room. I blinked back the sudden burn in my eyes. Crying wasn't going to get me a job or pay my rent in 6 months. Underneath the main tray, I found a small canvas pouch. Inside were a few black and white photographs. One was of a young woman with my eyes and a shy smile, holding a baby wrapped in a thick blanket. My mother. Another was of my father, younger than I remembered, leaning against a half-finished wall of a wooden house, grinning at the camera. He looked strong and happy. Behind him were tall, dark trees. The last photo was of me, a chubby-cheeked toddler sitting on his shoulders. We were both laughing. I had never seen these pictures before. The system gives you a file, a collection of reports and assessments. It doesn't give you photos. It doesn't give you a history. It gives you a case number. My hands were shaking as I carefully placed the photos on the cot beside me. This was proof. Proof that I existed before I was a case file. Proof that I was loved. At the very bottom of the box, lying flat against the metal, was a thick manila envelope, yellowed with age. It was folded in half, a deep crease down the middle. There was no name on it, no writing at all. It was sealed with a piece of brittle, yellowed tape. I peeled it back carefully. The paper inside was thick, stiff, and covered in dense, official-looking text. At the top, in stern, block letters, it said, "Quitclaim deed." I didn't know what that meant. I scanned the document, my eyes catching on phrases I didn't understand. Grantor, grantee, legal description. Then I saw the names. The grantor was a man named Thomas Miller. The grantee was my father, Daniel Carter. And then, below that, another name had been added in careful, handwritten ink. My name, Leah Carter. My breath hitched. I read further, my heart starting to beat a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The document described a piece of property, a parcel of land situated in the county of Stonebriar, state of... It listed coordinates, boundaries, markers I couldn't visualize. And then, at the bottom, a number that made me read it twice, then a third time. 60.4 acres. 60 acres. It was an impossible number, a number from a movie, from a book. People I knew didn't own 60 acres. People I knew lived in concrete boxes and hoped to get a job that paid more than minimum wage. My father had been a carpenter. He built things for other people. How could he have owned something so vast? It had to be a mistake, some old, forgotten document that didn't mean anything. Maybe he sold it. Maybe the state took it. It was dated 19 years ago, a year before I was born. I folded it back up, my hands trembling slightly, and slid it back into the envelope. I tucked the envelope and the photos into my bag, zipped it tight, and pushed the toolbox under my cot. It was too much. The photos, the deed, the sudden, overwhelming weight of a past I never knew I had. I lay down on the thin mattress, pulled the blanket up to my chin, and stared at the brick wall outside the window until the city lights painted faint, shifting patterns on the ceiling. For the first time, I wasn't just grieving a ghost. I was grieving a man who owned tools and photographs and, impossibly, 60 acres of land. And I had no idea what to do about it. The next morning, I called the only person I could think of who might be able to help. Mr. Henderson wasn't a lawyer. He was a volunteer advocate who helped kids navigate the transition out of foster care. He was in his late 50s, with a kind, tired face and a patient voice that made you feel like he had all the time in the world, even though you knew he didn't. I'd met him a few times at workshops he ran at Northwood. He taught us how to write a resume, how to open a bank account, how to not look like an easy target on the street. I met him at a small coffee shop downtown, the kind of place I never would have gone into on my own. It smelled like burnt coffee and felt aggressively cheerful. I slid the manila envelope across the table. "I found this yesterday," I said, my voice barely a whisper. It was in my father's toolbox. He opened it, his eyebrows drawing together as he unfolded the deed. He read it slowly, his lips moving silently. He held it up to the light, felt the texture of the paper. He was quiet for a long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the hiss of the espresso machine and the clatter of ceramic mugs. "A quitclaim deed," he said finally, his voice thoughtful. "This basically transfers ownership from one person to another. It seems your father, Daniel Carter, was given this land by a Thomas Miller." "Do you think it's real?" I asked, a knot of hope and fear tightening in my stomach. "The land, I mean." "The document looks legitimate for its age," he said, tapping a finger on the county seal. "Stonebriar County. That's way up north. Pretty remote. Mostly timberland and small farms up there." He pulled out his phone and started typing. "The question isn't whether it was real then, Leah. The question is who it belongs to now." He spent the next 20 minutes making calls. I watched him, my coffee growing cold in my hands. I saw his expression shift from professional curiosity to genuine surprise. He scribbled notes on a napkin, his handwriting a messy scrawl of addresses and numbers. Finally, he hung up and looked at me, a strange expression on his face. It was a mix of pity and something else. Excitement, maybe. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "the good news is the land exists. 60.4 acres, registered under the name Daniel Carter. According to the county clerk, it's never been sold. He added your name to the deed as a joint tenant with rights of survivorship. That means when he passed, ownership automatically transferred to you. Legally, Leah, that land is yours." The words hung in the air between us. My land. The phrase felt foreign, impossible. I owned something. Not just a bag of clothes, but a piece of the earth. A piece of the world. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "But," Mr. Henderson said, and his voice brought me crashing back down. "There's always a but." He slid the napkin across the table. "The property taxes haven't been paid in 12 years. Not since your father died. With interest and penalties, you owe the county just over $22,000. $22,000. They might as well have said $1 million. I had exactly $114 to my name, a parting gift from the state. The hope that had flared in my chest moments before turned to ash. Of course, it was a dream, a cruel joke. "I don't have that," I said, the words tasting like defeat. "I know," he said gently, "and it gets more complicated. A development firm, Ridgeview Holdings, has been trying to acquire the land. They made an offer to the county to settle the tax debt in exchange for the title. Since you're the legal heir, the county has to give you the chance to respond first. They've been sending notices, but they were going to your last known address, which was your mom's old place. They've been returned to sender for years." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Ridgeview is offering to pay you $5,000 for you to sign over the deed. They'll handle the back taxes. You walk away with $5,000, clean and clear. $5,000. To me, right then, that was a fortune. It was a security deposit on a real apartment. It was a buffer, a chance to breathe. It was a ticket out of the Miller Street facility and away from Sasha and her spiderweb tattoo. It was the smart choice, the only choice. Any sane person would take the money. "You have 30 days to respond to the county," Mr. Henderson said. "After that, they'll likely proceed with the tax sale to Ridgeview." $5,000 isn't a lot for 60 acres, Leah, even remote land. They're lowballing you because they think you're a foster kid with no resources who will jump at the first offer. To be blunt, they're probably right. He was just being practical. He was doing his job. But his words stung. A foster kid with no resources. That's all I was. That's all they saw. I looked down at the deed, at my father's name next to mine. He hadn't just left me a piece of paper. He had left me a piece of himself. A piece of a life I never got to have. Could I just sell it for a few $1,000s without even seeing it? I have to go there, I said, the words coming out before I had even fully formed the thought. Mr. Henderson blinked. Go there? To Stonebriar? Leah, it's a 6-hour bus ride. What are you going to do when you get there? There's probably nothing on the land but trees. I don't know, I admitted. But I can't sign it away. Not yet. Not until I've stood on it. He studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his eyes. The professional advocate receded, and the kind, tired man looked out. He sighed, a long, weary sound. Okay, he said, nodding slowly. Okay, you have a right to see what's yours. He scribbled an address on another napkin. This is the bus station. The northbound coach leaves at 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. It'll drop you in the town of Northwood. Funny coincidence, huh? From there, the property is another 8 miles out. You'll have to find a ride. He reached into his wallet and pulled out 2 $50 bills, pushing them across the table toward me. This is a loan, he said before I could protest. For the bus ticket and some food. Pay me back when you can. Call me when you get there. And Leah, be careful. I took the money, my throat tight. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in a long time. I will, I promised. Thank you. As I walked out of the coffee shop, the city noise seemed to fade away. My mind was a whirlwind of impossible numbers. 18 years old. 12 years in the system. 60 acres of land. $22,000 in debt. 30 days to decide. 6 hours on a bus. One choice. For the first time, it felt like a choice that was truly my own. The bus ride was long and quiet. I sat by the window, watching the city's dense, gray sprawl slowly give way to suburbs, then to rolling farmland, and finally, to thick, unbroken forests of pine and fir. The sky seemed to get bigger, the air cleaner. I watched the miles tick by on the roadside signs, each one taking me further from the only life I knew and closer to a complete unknown. I clutched my backpack, the deed and the photos inside feeling like a heavy, precious weight against my knees. I thought about my father, the man in the photograph, smiling and strong, the man who organized his tools with such care. What was he like? Why had he bought this land? The story I'd always been told was simple. He was a good man, a hard worker, and he had a tragic accident. But that story didn't explain 60 acres of hidden land. It didn't explain why he'd put my name on the deed and then never told anyone about it. It felt like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. The bus pulled into Northwood just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The station was just a gravel pull-off next to a general store with a flickering neon sign that said, "Eat." The air was crisp and cold, smelling of pine and wood smoke. It was profoundly quiet. After years of city noise, the silence was so complete, it felt loud. A handful of people got off with me, greeted by family and friends. Within minutes, I was the only one left, standing under the buzz of the failing neon sign with my backpack and the address Mr. Henderson had found scrawled on a piece of paper. The property was on something called Sparrowhawk Road. The man behind the counter in the general store was old, with a deeply lined face and a faded flannel shirt. He looked me over with open curiosity. Strangers were clearly an event here. "Need something?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. I'm looking for Sparrowhawk Road, I said. I need to get to this address. I showed him the paper. He squinted at it. That's old Tom Miller's place, or was. Ain't nobody lived out there in, must be 15 years now. It's way out past the old quarry. You ain't gonna get a cab to go out there, not this time of night. My heart sank. Of course. It wasn't going to be that easy. Is there anywhere I can stay? I asked. A motel? He chuckled, a dry rustling sound. Nothing like that in Northwood. Folks round here have a spare room, not a spare rate. He paused, studying me again. You family of Toms? No, I said. My father bought the land from him, a long time ago. This seemed to pique his interest. Your father? Who's that? Daniel Carter. The man's eyes widened slightly. Danny Carter's girl. Well, I'll be. I remember him. Good man. Quiet. Kept to himself mostly. Damn shame what happened to him. He shook his head. Look, my son-in-law, Hank, drives the morning delivery truck for the lumber mill. He goes right past the turnoff for Sparrowhawk. Be here at 6 a.m. He can give you a lift. The relief was so sudden and immense it almost made my knees weak. Thank you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. Don't mention it, he said, turning back to wiping the counter. Anyone of Danny's is welcome here. I spent the next few hours in a worn armchair by the store's pot-bellied stove, nursing a hot chocolate and eating a stale sandwich. The old man, whose name was Earl, mostly left me alone, but his quiet presence felt protective. I watched the few locals who came in for milk or bread. They all nodded to Earl, their conversations easy and familiar. This was a community, a real one. It was so different from the forced, fragile bonds of the group home. I must have fallen asleep in the chair, because the next thing I knew, Earl was gently shaking my shoulder. It was dark outside, the stars brilliant in a way I'd never seen in the city. Hank's here, he said. Hank was a big man with a kind smile who didn't ask too many questions. I climbed into the cab of his truck, and we rumbled down the dark, empty highway. The headlights cut a tunnel through the immense darkness. We drove for 20 minutes in comfortable silence before he slowed and pointed to a narrow, unpaved track leading off into the trees. This is it, he said. Sparrowhawk Road. The old Miller place is about a mile in. You sure you want me to leave you here? It's pretty rough. I'm sure, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. Thank you for the ride. I stepped out of the truck and into the pre-dawn chill. The air was so cold it stung my lungs. Hank gave me a final, concerned look and then drove off, the red of his taillights disappearing into the darkness. And then I was alone. Utterly, completely alone. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind in the towering pines and the frantic beating of my own heart. I started walking. The road was more of a suggestion than a reality, a pair of rutted tracks overgrown with weeds. The trees pressed in on both sides, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dark canopy. With every step, I felt like I was walking deeper into the past, into my father's world. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin, and I stepped into a clearing. And there it was, a small cabin, its wood weathered to a silvery gray. The roof sagged in the middle, and a couple of windows were boarded up, but it was standing. Behind it, the land sloped down into a wide, shallow valley, thick with trees, their leaves just beginning to turn the fiery colors of autumn. The rising sun was just starting to touch the tops of the highest peaks in the distance, bathing them in a soft, golden light. This was it, my 60 acres, my inheritance. It was wild, neglected, and more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. I walked slowly toward the cabin, my boots sinking into the damp earth. The front porch steps groaned under my weight, but they held. The door was locked, the knob rusted solid. I peered through a grimy window. I could just make out the shapes of furniture inside, draped in dusty white cloths like sleeping ghosts. I walked the perimeter, running my hand along the rough-hewn logs. At the back of the cabin, tucked under the eaves, was a small, stacked woodpile, and leaning against it, as if left there only yesterday, was an axe. It was old, the handle smooth and dark, the head pitted with rust but still sharp. It felt like a sign. I took the axe back to the front door. I didn't want to break a window. It felt wrong, like a violation. I wedged the blade of the axe into the doorframe next to the lock and leaned into it with all my weight. The old wood groaned, splintered, and then, with a loud crack, the jamb gave way. The door swung inward into the darkness. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding. Taking a deep breath, I stepped across the threshold, out of the world I knew, and into the one my father had left for me. The air inside was thick and musty, the smell of dust, decay, and trapped time. Thin beams of sunlight cut through the grime on the windows, illuminating swirling motes of dust. It was a single room. A stone fireplace stood against one wall, a simple wooden table and 2 chairs in the center, a bed frame in the corner. Everything was covered in a thick, gray blanket of dust. It was a simple place, a humble place, but it felt solid. It felt real. This was where my father had been. Maybe the picture of him leaning against the half-finished house was taken right here. I walked to the center of the room and set down my backpack. I ran a hand over the dusty surface of the table, leaving a clean streak in the grime. Home. The word surfaced in my mind, unbidden. It was a ridiculous thought. This wasn't a home, it was a ruin. But the feeling persisted. I started to explore, my movements slow and deliberate. I opened the door to a small pantry. The shelves were empty except for a few rusty cans. I looked up at the loft, a small sleeping space accessible by a wooden ladder. It was empty. It felt like the place had been cleaned out, abandoned in a hurry. Disappointment began to creep in. I had come all this way, but what was I looking for? What did I expect to find? A clue? An answer? I went back to the main room, my eyes scanning every corner. The floor was made of wide wooden planks. As I walked past the fireplace, one of the boards under my foot gave a slight, hollow-sounding squeak. I stopped. I shifted my weight. It happened again. I knelt down, my fingers probing the edges of the board. One side seemed to have a small gap, wider than the others. Using the tip of a screwdriver from my father's toolbox, which I'd brought with me, I pried at the edge. The nails, old and rusted, groaned in protest. The board lifted, and there, nestled in the dark space below the floor, was a metal box. Not a toolbox like my father's, but a smaller, heavier lockbox, the kind used for important documents. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. But sitting right on top of it was a small, tarnished silver key on a leather cord. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. It turned with a stiff, grating click. I lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no treasure, just a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to me. For Leah, the handwriting said, a strong, clean script. On her 18th birthday. My breath caught in my throat. I lifted the stack out of the box. There were at least a dozen letters. I untied the ribbon and took the one on top. My name was written on the front, nothing else. I carefully tore it open. The paper inside was crisp, as if it had been written yesterday. My dearest Leah, it began. If you are reading this, then it means 2 things. First, it means you have turned 18. Happy birthday, my sweet girl. I can only imagine the beautiful young woman you have become. Second, it means that I am not there to give this to you myself. And for that, I am more sorry than you will ever know. I had to stop and take a deep, shuddering breath. I sat down on the dusty floor, leaning against the cold stone of the hearth, and continued to read. His voice, silent for 12 years, rose from the page, clear and strong and full of a love so fierce it felt like a physical presence in the room. I know you have questions, Leah, a lifetime of them. I know you probably hate me. I need you to understand that every choice I made, every single one, was to protect you. The story they told you about my death was a lie, a necessary one. I didn't die in a construction accident. I died because I made a deal with bad people to save your mother. I read on, my world tilting on its axis. He wrote about my mother's illness, a rare form of cancer the doctors had given up on. The insurance ran out. He was desperate. He was a carpenter, and a man he worked with introduced him to a man who could solve problems. A loan shark with ties to organized crime. My father borrowed the money for an experimental treatment for my mom. It didn't work. She passed away, and he was left with an impossible debt to dangerous men. They didn't want money, Leah. They wanted this land. I had bought this place with Tom Miller, an old friend, years before I met your mom. It was our dream to build a life here, off the grid, quiet and free. Tom passed before we could start, and he left his half to me. These men, they found out about it. They knew its value wasn't in the timber, but in what was under it. There's a rare mineral deposit in the valley. Nothing huge, but enough to be worth a lot to the right people. They wanted the deed. I knew if I gave it to them, they would never stop. They would own me, and by extension, they would own you. You would never be safe. He explained that he knew they were coming for him. He couldn't go to the police. The men had connections everywhere. So he made a plan. He used the last of his money to create a trust to pay the property taxes for as long as it would last, but he knew it wouldn't be long enough. He hid the deed in his toolbox, knowing it was the one thing that would eventually find its way to me. And then, he made the hardest choice of all. I had to make you disappear, little bird, he wrote, and a tear I hadn't realized was forming splashed onto the page, smearing the ink. I had to make you untraceable. The foster system, as cold and cruel as I knew it would be, was the only place I could hide you where they would never think to look. They were looking for Daniel Carter's daughter. I had to make you a ward of the state. I staged the accident at the work site. I let them think I was dead. The man I owed money to believed it. It was the only way to sever the connection between you and this place. The only way to give you a chance at a real life, a safe life. I knew you would be raised by strangers. I knew you would feel abandoned. I have lived with that knowledge every single day. Please, please believe me when I say it broke my heart into a million pieces. It was an act of love, Leah. A terrible, desperate act of love. The letter fell from my hands. I couldn't breathe. The entire foundation of my life, the story I had built my identity on, the abandoned child, the tragic orphan, it was all a lie. I wasn't abandoned. I was protected. I wasn't forgotten. I was hidden. The anger I had carried for 12 years, a cold, hard stone in my chest, cracked. And underneath it was a grief so profound it felt like I was drowning. I cried. I sat on the floor of that dusty, forgotten cabin, and I cried for the father I never knew, the man who had faced down monsters to keep me safe. I cried for the little girl who grew up believing she was unwanted. I cried for the 12 lost years, the years we could have had here, together. I cried until I was empty, until all that was left was the quiet hum of the wind outside and the weight of my father's words settling deep in my bones. I spent the rest of the day reading the letters. One by one, he painted a picture of the life he had dreamed for us. He wrote about the cabin, how he built it with his own 2 hands. He wrote about the land, the way the light looks in the valley in the morning, the spot by the creek where the wild deer come to drink. He taught me about the trees, about the stars. He told me jokes. He told me he was proud of me. He told me he loved me. It was a lifetime of conversations, packed into a dozen envelopes. The final letter was different. It was shorter, the handwriting a little less steady. Leah, by now you know everything, and you have a choice to make. The money I set aside for the taxes is long gone. I know that, and I know people will be coming for this land. They'll offer you money. It will probably seem like a lot. Enough to start a new life, to get away from everything. I won't blame you if you take it. You deserve an easy life after everything you've been through. But I want you to know what you'd be selling. This place isn't just dirt and trees. It's a foundation. It's a start. It's the one thing in this world that is truly yours, bought and paid for with a sacrifice you're only now beginning to understand. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know that I am with you. Always. Your loving father, Daniel. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. The cabin was growing cold. I carefully folded the letters, tied them back up with the ribbon, and placed them in my backpack. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. But I also felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in my entire life. I knew who I was. I was Daniel Carter's daughter, and this was my home. My phone, which had been without a signal all day, suddenly buzzed. I looked at the screen. It was Mr. Henderson. I answered, my voice hoarse. Leah? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you. Are you okay? Where are you? I'm here, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I'm at the cabin. Listen, he said, his voice urgent. I just got off the phone with the lawyer from Ridgeview Holdings. They know you're the heir now. They're upping their offer. $20,000, Leah. They'll wire it to you tomorrow. All you have to do is agree to sign. They said the offer is only good for 24 hours. They're trying to pressure you. $20,000. 2 days ago, that number would have been my salvation. It would have been the answer to every problem I had. Now, it felt like an insult. They weren't just trying to buy 60 acres of land. They were trying to buy my father's sacrifice. They were trying to buy my history, my future. I looked around the dark, dusty room. I saw not what it was, but what it could be. A fire in the hearth, new glass in the windows, a life. My life. Leah, are you there? What should I tell them? Mr. Henderson's voice was tight with tension. He thought he was saving me, offering me a lifeline. I took a deep breath, the cold, clean air of the cabin filling my lungs. Tell them no, I said. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. No? Leah, are you sure? $20,000. I'm sure, I said, and for the first time, my voice didn't waver. It was strong, clear, and absolute. Tell them the land is not for sale. I hung up the phone before he could argue. The decision was made. A wave of terror and exhilaration washed over me. I had just turned down more money than I had ever seen. I had no job, no heat, no electricity, and a $22,000 debt hanging over my head. I had chosen the harder path, the impossible path, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I slept that night on the floor, wrapped in my jacket, with my backpack for a pillow. It was the coldest, most uncomfortable night of my life, and I slept better than I had in years. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I used the last of the money from Mr. Henderson to buy some basic supplies from Earl at the general store. A sleeping bag, a lantern, some canned food, an axe, and a shovel. I told him my plan. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. But when I paid, he pushed a box of waterproof matches and a heavy wool blanket across the counter. On the house, he grunted. Winter comes early in these mountains. Every day was a battle. I learned how to split wood for the fireplace. I cleared the weeds and brush from around the cabin. I used old planks I found in a collapsed shed out back to patch the hole in the roof. I hauled water from the creek in a bucket. My hands, soft from years of institutional life, became calloused and raw. My muscles ached constantly. Some nights, huddled by the weak fire, I would feel a wave of despair wash over me. I would think about the $20,000 and the easy life I had turned down. I would wonder if I was crazy. But then I would pull out my father's letters and read them by the light of the lantern. His words would give me strength. I wasn't just fixing a cabin, I was honoring his memory. I was building a future on the foundation of his love. One afternoon, while clearing out the old, collapsed shed, my shovel hit something hard. I dug around it, thinking it was a large rock. It was another metal box, larger than the first one and much heavier. It was rusted shut. It took me the better part of an hour with the axe and a crowbar I found to pry the lid open. I stared inside, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It was full of cash. Stacks of old bills, bundled with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. And on top of the money, another letter. A single sheet of paper in a sealed envelope. "For the taxes," it said on the front. I opened it, my hands trembling. "My Leah," it read. "This is the last secret." This was my emergency fund, the money I saved from side jobs over the years. It's not a fortune, but I counted it before I sealed this box. It should be enough to pay off the county and give you a small cushion to start with. Use it well. Live a good life. Make this place a home. I love you, Dad. I sat back on my heels, the dusty air of the shed thick in my throat. I didn't count the money right away. I just sat there, looking at it, as tears streamed down my face. This wasn't a reward. It was a responsibility. It was his final gift, his last act of protection. He had thought of everything. The next day, I walked the 8 miles back into town. I went to the post office and bought a money order for the full amount of the back taxes and mailed it to the Stonebriar County Tax Office. It was the most terrifying and liberating thing I had ever done. The weight of the debt was gone. The land was truly mine. With the money that was left, I bought real supplies. A small generator, tools, a new mattress. I hired Hank, the truck driver, to help me haul it all out to the cabin. When he saw the work I had done, the cleared brush, the patched roof, he just whistled, a low note of surprise. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" he said. "I am," I told him. He nodded, a look of respect in his eyes. "Your old man would be proud." Word got around the small town of Northwood. The story of Danny Carter's girl, the city kid who came back to fix up the old Miller place, became something of a local legend. People started to help, in small, quiet ways. Earl would save the day-old newspapers for me to use as kindling. Hank's wife brought me a hot casserole one evening, insisting I needed a real meal. A neighboring farmer, a man who hadn't spoken more than 2 words to me, left a basket of fresh vegetables on my porch one morning. They weren't just being kind. They were welcoming me. I had spent my entire life as an outsider, a temporary resident. Here, in this remote, quiet corner of the world, I was slowly, painstakingly, becoming part of a community. I had found my place. It's been a year now. The cabin is no longer a ruin. It's a home. I have glass in the windows and a garden out back. I have a part-time job working at Earl's store. I paid back Mr. Henderson. I still have a long way to go. The work is hard, and some days are lonely. But I am not the same girl who walked out of that group home with nothing but a trash bag and a rusty toolbox. I learned that inheritance isn't about money or land. It's about the stories we carry and the sacrifices that were made for us. My father left me more than 60 acres of dirt. He left me a legacy of love and resilience. He gave me a chance to build a life of my own, on my own terms. Sometimes, in the evening, I walk down to the creek, to the spot he wrote about in his letters. I watch the deer come to drink in the twilight, and I feel him there with me. I feel his pride, his love. I am not a case file. I am not a ward of the state. I am Leah Carter, and I am home. This journey taught me that sometimes the things that seem like endings are actually beginnings in disguise. That feeling of being abandoned can sometimes be a misunderstood act of protection. Home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build, with your own two hands and your own choices. And I want to know, have you ever had a moment that completely rewrote the story of your life? Have you ever found a connection to your past that changed your future? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one, because this community is built on the idea that our stories matter, that our struggles connect us. If my story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of finding where you belong, please subscribe to the channel. You're not alone in this. We're building our homes together.